Since 2020, an opaque organization calling itself the Disinfo Lab has published lengthy dossiers and social media posts claiming to reveal the personal relationships and funding sources behind US-based critics of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The Disinfo Lab has combined fact-based research with unsubstantiated claims to paint US government figures, researchers, humanitarian groups, and Indian American rights activists as part of a conspiracy purportedly led by global Islamic groups and billionaire George Soros to undermine India. In each instance, these allegations have gone viral on Indian social media after they were amplified by pro-Modi influencers who at times used the group's findings to validate their own positions. Its reports have been cited by Indian officials on television and presented on Capitol Hill. Despite its reach, the Disinfo Lab does not disclose its affiliation, describing itself on its website as a separate legal entity that seeks to offer completely unbiased research. In reality, however, the Disinfo Lab was set up and is run by an Indian intelligence officer to research and discredit foreign critics of the Modi government, according to 3 people who worked in the organization or were familiar with its establishment. While claiming that it aimed to uncover Indian anti-information, the Disinfo Lab itself is running a covert influence operation, they said. The organization's material is among the most widely circulated by right-wing Indians and Hindu nationalists. Its reports gain global reach partly because they are spread on social media by high-profile figures with large followings on X, previously known as Twitter, including current and former officials in Modi's Bharatiya Janata Party, former intelligence and military brass, and a cabinet member, according to a Washington Post analysis of nearly 100,000 reposts of Disinfo Lab content on X. While it's unclear how many of them, if any, are aware of the Disinfo Lab's intelligence ties, these top retweeters give the Disinfo Lab a stamp of authority and, some of its targets say, boost its ability to intimidate individuals overseas. Disinfo Lab reports found their way into a pro-government narrative that a violent 2021 protest by farmers at New Delhi's Red Fort, seen in a motorbike mirror's reflection, was masterminded by Pakistan and a US-based activist and journalist. The Disinfo Lab's activities show how online propaganda campaigns waged by the BJP and its allies have been expanding beyond their traditional domestic aims of shoring up popular support and denigrating opposition parties, and now seek to influence attitudes far beyond India's border. Moreover, the organization's ties to an Indian intelligence officer could blur lines traditionally observed by the country's security apparatus between operations that serve the strategic interests of India and those that advance the political objectives of the ruling party, analysts said. Sumit Gungalai, an expert on Indian diplomacy and national security at Indiana University at Bloomington, said undermining foreign governments and their officials is routine work for intelligence agencies around the world. But if Indian intelligence is besmirching American critics and civil society organizations, it would be crossing a line reminiscent of KGB tactics during the Cold War, he said. It would be part and parcel of Modi's government attitude towards dissent, whether at home or abroad. The Disinfo Lab, which at one point consisted of about a dozen private contractors working out of a 4-story whitewashed building on a leafy street in New Delhi, was created in mid-2020 by Lieutenant Colonel Dibya Sapati. Now 39, an intelligence officer who has worked to shape international perceptions of India, said the 3 people familiar with the operation. They spoke on condition of anonymity to describe sensitive intelligence activities. Satpathy was initially commissioned as an infantry officer and served in the Army's intelligence and public information units, said a person briefed on his military personnel record. That person and another source close to the military said Satpathy was later detailed to his current posting with India's external intelligence agency, the Research and Analysis Wing. Over the years, Satpathy has introduced himself to Western journalists and commentators under fake identities, including his preferred alias, Shakti, meaning power in Hindi, and sought favorable coverage of India or critical coverage of its adversaries, Pakistan and China, according to the 5 additional people who had contact with Satpathy. In an emailed response to questions from the Post, Disinfo Labs said, "We are no form associated with any government agency, nor with any of its personnel, nor are we associated with any other organizations, Indian or international." The organization said it was created by individuals who had met in an anti-corruption political movement and were concerned about the massive disinformation targeted at India to sow divisions in society. The email signed by Disinfo Lab said the group did not side with Modi's government. "We are equal opportunity exposers, even calling out the ruling party. Disinformation is our arch nemesis, irrespective of political allegiance." Over the past 5 years, social media researchers have uncovered large Indian online networks that promote the BJP's foreign policy positions to domestic and foreign audiences. Coordinated social media accounts have been found to play a role, for instance, in spreading identical posts in support of Russia, an important supplier of weapons and energy to India, and of Israel, an increasingly close partner. The Indian right wing is a new player that has arrived on the world stage and wants to reshape global discussion, said Jorjit Pal, a professor of information at the University of Michigan who teaches disinformation in India. So far, much of it is done in the same way. It's done within India, though crude, blunt force. But it's getting smarter. The Disinfo lab has emerged as one of the most sophisticated players. In 28 reports it has published so far, the organization has often painted a picture for India under attack by a sprawling nexus of conspirators funded by Pakistani intelligence, the Muslim Brotherhood, and Soros. The Disinfo Lab's narrative alleges that these funds have found their way to Rep. Pramila Jayapal, an Indian-American and outspoken critic of Modi. Indian-American activists who criticize the Modi government for discrimination against Muslims and low-caste Hindus, and members of U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedoms, a bipartisan panel that has recommended the State Department designate India a country of particular concern for the Modi's government treatment of Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, and other minority groups. The Disinfo Lab often cites publicly available US lobbying and campaign finance records and produces complex flowcharts to illustrate alleged relationships, but the group draws tenuous connections, claiming, for instance, that the US CIRF commissioner was influenced by Islamists because she once worked on a conservative fundraising committee alongside a lobbyist who went on to represent Muslim American groups. When the Disinfo Lab released its first major report in early 2021, it created a template for the kind of attacks that would be repeated in the coming years. The organization released a dossier nearly 100 pages long, alleging that Peter Friedrich, a California-based activist and journalist who has written magazine articles and given public speeches critical of BJP and affiliated Hindu national groups, had ties to the Sikh separatist movement and Pakistan's premier intelligence agency. They uncovered Friedrich's employment history, published his parents' names, and plotted detailed graphs about his social media activity. A prominent Indian official among them spread the dossier on Twitter, amplifying the allegations. In a recent interview, Friedrich said that many personal and work details reported by Disinfo Lab were true, but that other claims that he fomented an anti-government riot or had ties to Pakistani intelligence were fabricated. The attacks made him fear for his safety, he said. It felt like the earth shook. I understood it as a warning shot across the bow saying, you need to stay in your lane, stop poking your nose in our business, and keep your mouth shut. The Disinfo Lab also published a lengthy report in April denouncing Sunita Viswanath, a New York-based founder of the rights group Hindus for Human Rights, who has criticized the BJP's Hindu nationalist ideology as antithetical to Hinduism. The Disinfo Lab dug into her past and reported that a non-profit she launched to help female Afghan refugees had received funding from Soros's Open Society foundations. 2 months later, after Indian opposition leader Rahul Gandhi attended a meeting in Washington with Viswanath as part of a US tour, Amit Malviya, the head of BJP's social media team, tweeted a photo of the meeting and shared a flowchart stamped with the Disinfo Lab logo, illustrating Viswanath's connection to Soros. Who is she exactly? Malviya wrote on X. She is nothing but a proxy of George Soros, who has committed $1 billion worth to meddle in India's international affairs through a network of opposition leaders, think tanks, journalists, lawyers, and activists. The post was retweeted 7,800 times. And last month, after the post published an article about the Indian government's effort to censor X, the Disinfo Lab took to that platform and accused the post falsely of waging psychological warfare against India at the behest of CIA. The thread also went viral. Until at least 2021, the Disinfo Lab shared its office with a separate team headed by a career raw intelligence officer who specialized in China and carried out information operations related to Tibet, said the 3 sources who described the activities to the Post. The Disinfo Lab itself was headed by Satpathy, whose work was focused mostly on countering Pakistan and the unrest it allegedly foments in the Indian border state of Punjab and Indian-controlled Kashmir, these people said. Much of the Disinfo Lab's work reflected the thinking of its founder, Satpathy, who was described by journalists, a government official, and a person close to the military as a deeply patriotic officer who is fascinated by geopolitical intrigue and concerned by threats he sees India facing. One of Satpathy's former associates recalled working with him to feed Pakistani documents to Bruno Maçães, a former Portuguese diplomat who had written books about China's Belt and Road Initiative and maintains a large following on X. Maçães, who confirmed he had been approached by men claiming to be Pakistani dissidents, said he was not aware that they were connected to Indian intelligence, but he shared screenshots showing he was forwarded documents from a Telegram user named Shakti. Maçães said he ultimately did not write about the documents. One person who played a role in the Disinfo Lab's formation said the operation emerged from a worldview in which India is besieged by information warfare from foreign countries that stroke intelligence divisions and grievances within India. For years, government officials, including Modi, have also pointed a finger at Western human rights and other non-profit groups and news media, alleging they unfairly criticize India and conspire to hold back its development. The Indian government felt it was not having its views conveyed in the international media, the person said. He added that initially the goal was for Disinfo Lab to be viewed as a neutral organization on a par well-known Western disinformation research groups and cited by mainstream news outlets. Like other people cited, he spoke on the condition of anonymity for fear of Indian government retribution. In February, Soros, a frequent critic of Modi, warned in a speech at the Munich Security Conference that the Indian leader was undemocratic and would lose his stranglehold over the Indian government. A day later, the Disinfo Lab posted a lengthy tweet thread alleging that Soros had tried to the Muslim Brotherhood and manipulated fake US-based advocacy groups to smear India. A spokesperson for Soros' Open Society Foundations called the Disinfo Lab's claims entirely baseless and said that they were part of a campaign by this site and others in India against advocates of human rights, democratic governments, and the rule of law in the service of political aims of BJP and its allies. The post analyzed 250 most followed accounts that reposted content from the Disinfo Lab. Of those, the post identified 35 current or former BJP officials, 14 government or military leaders, 61 journalists, authors or thought leaders, and 140 influencers or content creators, including Indian and American right-wing ideologues. Many had hundreds and thousands or millions of followers and shared Disinfo Lab content dozens or even hundreds of times. Other key spreaders the post-analysis found were US-based groups advocating for Hindu nationalist causes. Some of the Disinfo Lab's frequent retweeters included Hindu Pact and Hindu Action, two initiatives of the US branch of the Vishwa Hindu Parishad, a right-wing Hindu organization that is ideologically allied with the BJP. Disinfo Lab reports have also made their way into American halls of power. Amid the COVID pandemic in 2021, a senior US congressman in the House India caucus received a Disinfo Lab report from a group in his district claiming that Islamic humanitarian agencies were receiving federal aid and sending it to Pakistan to fuel terrorist activities targeting India and the United States. The group's work also showed up in the debate this year over California legislation to outlaw caste-based discrimination. Opponents of the measure gave lawmakers a side presentation suggesting in part that they read a Disinfo Lab report attacking the group leading the push for the legislation, a person familiar with the lobbying efforts recalled. Speaking on the condition of anonymity to discuss sensitive matters, the dossier painted that group, a US-based civil rights organization called Equity Labs, as a radical outfit funded by Pakistan to orchestrate caste-related protests in the United States and included personal information about the group's director, her divorce, and her father. This is a situation where the American government needs to protect American citizens that are being targeted for foreign influence simply because we want to have rights like other Americans, said the director of Equity Labs. Riya Chakrabarti, a police director for Pro-Pluralism Hindus for Human Rights, a group critical of Modi, said lobbyists working for US-based Hindu nationalist groups have disseminated Disinfo Lab dossiers in other venues. She recalled attending the 2022 International Religious Freedom Summit at the Renaissance Hotel in Washington when a lobbyist from Hindu Pact walked around distributing a thick-bound Disinfo Lab report that claimed to connect Indian American Muslim Council, an Indian diaspora group critical of Modi, to Pakistani intelligence. The lobbyist knew that Chakrabarti often collaborates with the IAMC, Chakrabarti recalled, and warned her to know who you're sitting next to. In its response to the post, the Disinfo Lab pointed to its records of forcing activists and human rights fronts to shut down by exposing them, saying we take our craft very seriously and we make sure that our claims stand. In our understanding, fake news and fabricated data is the core of any info war. Ajay Shukla, a retired Indian Army colonel and a military affairs journalist, said the former prime ministers such as Indira Gandhi also painted her critics as national security threats, but the Modi government has gone further, sometimes blurring the line between its political foes and those who should be targeted by security apparatus, he said. The defense establishment exists to serve national and strategic interests, not political interests, Shukla said, but the BJP under Modi has seen critics as anti-Indian, the enemies of India itself. With its reports repeatedly cited by BJP officials and its profile rising, the Disinfo Lab gave its only interview to date in written format to the Indian freelance journalist Sandhya Ravi Shankar this summer. In response to Ravi Shankar's email questions, the organization explained that it was founded in 2020 by people with political and marketing backgrounds. The group said it relied mostly on conventional open-source intelligence gathering methods, lots of Googling, and its self-made data visualization tools. It warned that India was caught in a narrative war against many belligerents, the United States, China, Pakistan, and Hydra-headed Islamist fronts, all operating under lofty human rights and other banners. Left with no other choice, we are trying to do what we can with limited resources, the Disinfo lab said. The world moved from the information age to the disinformation age long back.